Who really killed Effie Entezari? It's been more than 30 years since she was murdered, and her daughter is on a quest to find out once and for all who would want to kill her mother. That's in today's True Crime Chronicles.
She had a life, and someone took that away.
Pooneh Gray will never forget May 1st, 1989. Her life would forever be altered in ways she would never have imagined.
There has not been one day that's gone by since my mom's murder that I haven't thought about her and this case.
Pooneh's mother, Effie Entezari, left for work like she had done so many mornings before. It was just before 6 a.m. She was approached by someone in the parking lot and shot in the head at point-blank range. A neighbor reported seeing a yellow car speed out of the parking lot shortly after Effie's murder. No other witnesses reported anything to the authorities.
This was a premeditated, highly calculating homicide.
A man was arrested and charged with the murder of Effie. That man just happened to be Mike Entezari, Effie's husband and Pooneh's father. Mike and Effie were going through a divorce. Mike had no alibi, and worse yet, a gun, the same type of gun that killed Effie, was found in Mike's car. A jury found him guilty of the murder of his wife. He ended up serving 16 years of a 25-year sentence behind bars until his death in 2019. Mike had always maintained his innocence.
It was not a fact-based trial. It was just a lot of smoke and mirrors.
Pooneh hired a team of lawyers, private investigators, forensic examiners in an attempt to find the real killer or killers. She will never stop fighting for justice and exonerating her father. Pooneh wants to know once and for all who killed Effie Entezari. They point to a lack of physical evidence against Mike Entezari. Mike didn't drive a yellow car like the one seen speeding away from the scene, and investigators never found evidence of Effie's blood on Mike's clothing or in the barrel of his gun. Pooneh believes one of the biggest pieces of evidence that could alter this case is DNA. Samples found on Effie's clothes years after her murder, thanks to DNA advancements.
There was a mixture. There were multiple individuals' DNA on the sweater and the DNA that was collected. The predominant DNA that we found is from the person who we believe is the shooter.
Will this new DNA evidence be the smoking gun of this case 32 years later? Will Pooneh be able to overturn her father's conviction and keep the promise she made to her mother? Will there ever be closure?
I've never had a doubt that I'm going to get the person that killed my mom.
A daughter's love for her mother knows no bounds. This story is truly heartbreaking. Earlier, Alan Sam spoke with podcast host Ashley Korslien for the latest on this case. Take a look.
And we are here with the Yellow Car podcast host, Ashley Korslien. Ashley, by the way, is also an award-winning journalist and longtime KGW anchor. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to DBL.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here to talk about the case.
Why did you think that this was a good topic, that this case specifically would be a good fit for your podcast?
Well, the case itself is compelling, but honestly, I would say it was Pooneh, the couple's daughter, at the center of this case. We are talking about someone who spent 32 years of her own life working on her mom's murder investigation, despite the fact that her dad went to prison. And the fact that she has spent more than $1 million, close to $2 million at this point, on a team of lawyers and investigators, to me was really compelling. And I thought, you know, there must be something else here if she hasn't been able to let this go 3 decades later.
Wow.
Right. Well, speaking about 3 decades later, if this same case happened today, what do you think would happen?
I would think at the very least, the investigation perhaps would have been done differently when you think about advancements in DNA technology that we have today that we didn't have. Back in 1989, DNA was in its infancy. Today, there would also be a lot of things done differently, I believe, with ballistics and how they examine and compare an evidence bullet to a gun. Now, as for the verdict and the outcome, it's hard to say what the evidence would have shown and whether a jury still would have convicted Mike.
Speaking of Mike Entezari, why was he found guilty?
I believe came down to the ballistics portion. When you have a state ballistics expert saying this bullet was fired from this gun, Mike's gun, to me, that's what really sealed the deal for the jury.
Pooneh found some strange occurrences leading up to her mother's death. You know, maybe that's why she hasn't been able to let this go. So can you tell our audience, what were they?
Yeah, so when Effie and Mike were separated, Effie had lived in her own apartment complex at the time of her death, and neighbors had eventually reported to police that there were some really strange occurrences, fights in her apartment at odd hours of the night, unknown men who were there. Effie seemed upset. The most striking thing was perhaps the medical examiner, when they did the autopsy, found bruising all over Effie's body, and the bruising had been there for some time, so that meant it was unrelated to the murder. Things that you couldn't really explain, and Mike was never tied to any of that activity. The daughter, Pooneh, goes, look, my mom was being threatened. Somebody wanted to silence her. She knew something, and people were hurting her. And that's the thread line throughout this series that really kept her going, is that there were just too many strange things happening to just explain away that my dad killed my mom.
Wow, Ashley, I just pray that your podcast, her and her 3 decades worth of research, somehow provides answers for her. How likely is it that prosecutors will reopen this case?
The sheriff's office did confirm to me they do have a detective actively working this case. So that to me was a little peek behind the curtain on, okay, they're looking into this. It's not like they're just brushing it off. I think at this point, they're not able to speak publicly about what they have discovered and what they're going to do moving forward.
Wow. Unbelievable. I really do hope that they reopen the case, just personally. Ashley, thank you so much for being on DBL's True Crime Chronicles and for bringing this case to light. You can check out DBL Nation, The Yellow Car on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Make sure that you listen. And thank you again, Ashley.
We'll
be right back.
Thanks, you guys, for having me. Appreciate it.